Great to be with you guys again. Bible Studies for Life student ministry leaders, welcome back. I've really enjoyed the things that we've covered up to this point, and I look forward just to continue to dig into the ideas of wisdom that we can see in Ecclesiastes, weighing out life from an eternal perspective versus life with no regard for eternity and heavenly things. This week, session 4, we're looking at the problem with work. Our scripture is Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 18 through 26, and Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 9 through 13. And here's our main point. Our work gains meaning when it's done to honor Christ. Apart from God and an eternal perspective, Solomon had actually grown to hate all the things that he devoted himself to. Remember, we talked about he explored finding satisfaction in riches and wealth, which a lot of people do today. Solomon had looked for satisfaction in building and his palace and his home and the things that he surrounded himself with. Found out there was no satisfaction. Alcohol, sex, all kind of things. He had pursued satisfaction in many ways, and he found that it wasn't there. And even in the work that he had done in pursuing satisfaction, he grew to hate it. Here are a couple things that he drew out of that. He says, you know what? All these things I've worked hard to earn, one day I'm going to pass on from this life. I'm going to die because of the curse of sin in this world. And all this stuff that I'm working so hard to achieve, to possess, I can't take it with me. And because of that, he just saw that all the work was meaningless from an under-the-sun perspective. Another thing that he observed as he contemplated this idea was that he couldn't trust those who would follow after him. He had certain values, certain things that he devoted himself to, but one day when he left, he would entrust everything that he had worked so hard for into the hands of someone else. And they may not necessarily see things or value things the same way that he did. And because of that, he didn't know what would come of it. He hated the work that he did. Now, the Bible teaches that there is wisdom in saving for the future. But if the only fruit that comes from work is our savings, is our possessions, is our stuff, the things that from a work-oriented perspective and an earthly perspective brings us fulfillment, all of that stuff is meaningless without a view of the eternal. Now, God did create us to work. We can look back to Genesis from the creation account. God placed Adam in the garden to work it. He called him to work it, to tend to the garden. So there's meaning in work. But what happened was when the curse of sin came upon creation, work was damaged in a certain sense. It became difficult for us. It's part of the curse, the way that we work, and it's difficult to accomplish and achieve the things that formerly were easy. Nonetheless, work in itself is a good thing, and when we do it for the sake of honoring God, there's eternal meaning in our work. For those who work with the eternal in view, we recognize that everything that we have comes from the Father, and instead of, like Solomon, coming to hate the things that we work for, we will appreciate even our possessions because we'll use them for the sake of God's purposes. So here's our practical question today. How could approaching school or practice, like extracurricular stuff, practice as a gift from God, benefit your students and help them to be a witness to others? I think it really comes down to something that we talked about earlier a couple sessions ago. It's not so much what we do, but it's how and why we do it. I think sometimes students, like football practice, for instance, it's sweaty, it's hot, it's tough. I mean, they're pounding on each other sometimes for hours, and it can be difficult, and we can be tempted to complain. If we're talking about music or about art, anything that we devote ourselves to, in a certain way, it can be tedious and mundane. The same thing about school and our academic endeavors. Your students can see those as tough. I mean, a lot of times school is tough for students and they don't necessarily enjoy it. But the truth of the matter is, if we see that as an opportunity to demonstrate God's grace in our lives, we're working at those things as if we're working unto God, serving Him. When we see those as opportunities to demonstrate to others how much we value God and how much He's changed us, that can create opportunities for people to see that God does make a difference in our lives. Help your students to evaluate practically how they can pursue the things that they've devoted themselves to for the sake of honoring God, because there are real ways you can help them identify those, make a difference in your students' lives, and for the sake of the kingdom. Thank you for being with me today.